Welcome to the only place where real, raw, and vulnerable conversations happen with IFBB bikini pros to give you an inside look at their struggles, strategies, mindset, passions, and all of life beyond the stage. This podcast is made to inspire, motivate, and remind competitors and the average gym goer that even the most extreme lifestyles and elite athletes have their ups and downs. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm your host, Celeste Rains-Turk, and now it's time for the Confessions of a Bikini Pro podcast. Our second coach of the series is someone I have been excited to have on for this series for a very long time. He's been so patient with me. And he is an extremely driven bodybuilding contest prep coach, lifestyle coach, and personal trainer, which is something we're going to be talking extensively about today. He is also an experienced bodybuilding athlete associated with some of the top competitors and brands in the sport. At an early age, this coach developed his passion for competitive prep through various individualized sports that demanded peak levels of physical performance. He is constantly seeking out innovative and scientific approaches to maximizing client health as well as physical and mental output. Although he possesses specialty certifications in performance enhancement, he enjoys catering to a large array of fitness and lifestyle goals in his business. And I didn't even clarify this with you, but is it Sega or Saga coaching?
It's Saga.
Saga! Okay, Saga coaching. This man loves motivating, inspiring, and pushing people to achieve drastic results, which we've seen through his posts and Instagram and all his clients. Whether his client is striving for weight loss or is a high caliber athlete or a hard charging professional, he can create and implement effective programs to launch them to success. So we're going to be getting his perspective on all of these topics. Welcome to the show, Sean Irwin. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. I'm grateful to be here and grateful to be chatting with you. And thank you for having me.
You are welcome. So I always ask my girls who come on the show what they do before their heel hits the stage. So I want to ask you what you're thinking about or maybe doing before your athletes hit the stage.
Oh man, it is just a straight adrenaline rush. My heart is beating out of my chest. But that's part of why I love this sport so much and why I love coaching is that adrenaline rush that I get. I grew up doing a lot of action sports, so it's something I'm familiar with and familiar territory for me. So that's part of the rush and the enjoyment. A lot of it's just straight adrenaline, not much thought process there. A lot of passion and a lot of built up energy into that moment. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, I was curious about who Sean was before he was a coach. So give us that background.
So I have a pretty diverse and eclectic background. I've participated in a lot of action sports, like I mentioned. I grew up racing competitive BMX for a while, competitive motocross. I played various other sports as well. When I was in like my mid-teens, I started to gravitate just towards the gym and the training aspect of things rather than any of the actual sports. My first job ever was at a supplement store, so I started to learn about supplements and physiology and all that kind of stuff, and just started to nerd out about everything. And any topic that I get into, I like obsess over, and it's just like I have to dive all the way in and just learn everything about it. So it basically played out from there, and it's been my passion ever since, and been just steady, consistent, building up to where we are now. So.
I think you have to have that passion in the fitness industry because one, there's so many people who enjoy fitness, but I think you have to have that passion to keep learning and that passion to explore to those depths because there are so many complexities that come along with any sport, but especially bodybuilding. So what's your overall philosophy when it comes to competing, and how does that, or even coaching, I should say, competitors, how does that play out with the people you coach?
So a lot of things that I learned growing up, being involved in those various sports was just a lot of sportsmanship and how to handle losses, how to not let wins get to your head, a lot of these different various aspects to any competitive endeavor, really. And I find that a lot of bodybuilding competitors get into this sport without that background, which is awesome. It's a new outlet for them and a very positive thing, but sometimes they haven't learned those lessons quite yet. So I definitely try to approach it from an actual coaching perspective, like any other coach in any other sport or endeavor would approach things in terms of coaching people mentally to be able to better handle those wins and losses and the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows of the sport, which this sport brings a lot of very high peaks and very low valleys. So, a lot of it's navigating that mentally, and I really strive to implement a lot of those things that I've learned through my past experiences into my coaching strategies.
That's really valuable being an athlete yourself and understanding what kind of coaching strategies worked for you and what was valuable to you as a competitive athlete or as someone striving for greatness. Being able to apply that in your coaching career, I think speaks volumes about your mission and it going a lot further than just trying to rack up wins. Because there's a lot of coaches who will do whatever it takes to make their end result look good. Like this is, we got this many pro cards. It's like, how many of your clients quit after that? So I think it's really great that that's how you want to approach it, because in bodybuilding, sure, there's maybe up to 6 trophies on that stage, but there's one winner, and that's the end of it. And you did all of that prep. So it can take a big toll on athletes. And I do think prioritizing teaching about that mental game and how are you going to actually cope with it if you don't get what you expected. Do
Mhm.
you have anything you wish competitors knew before getting into the sport that maybe they don't understand or maybe are misconceptions?
I think a lot of unfortunately, a lot of people get into it for superficial kind of motives, I suppose. Like they see the glitz and the glam and the attention and stuff. It's I see it as I always try to look at things on the bright side. It's could be transformational for their entire lifestyle. It could be a lot of a net positive outcome, right? In the long term, they may learn a lot of lessons through the process. But I think that the motives out the gate sometimes are a little bit superficial, and they have some very harsh lessons to learn out the gate if they've never participated in something like this before. And the amount of work and sacrifice and just grit that it takes in order to be truly competitive in this sport is a lot. And I think that people don't see beneath the iceberg, and they see all the wins and the excitement and all that kind of stuff on social media and whatever it may be. So I think that that's like the toughest lesson for a lot of people to learn, is that there's a lot of loss and sacrifice that we don't see on social media, that is going to come to you no matter how successful of an athlete you are. You're going to take losses at times. You're going to, have to handle very tough moments. And that comes with any kind of champion, in any sport or high caliber endeavor. It's just a part of the process. And I think that that's a rude awakening for some people because they don't quite see that aspect of things on the front end, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense, especially if most of the people they're seeing are the top dogs. You're going to think that's what your journey should look like or that's where you should be. But then you realize, like, I think it's actually quite disrespectful when someone who's new to the sport compares themselves to someone who's been in it and is at that top level, because there's so much that's had to happen for them to get there. And I'm really glad you used the word champion, because I wanted to hear what you think separates a phenomenal winning champion athlete from someone who's maybe just a good athlete.
So I think that there's a lot of different aspects that play into that. In any sport, there is a level of talent that's involved as well. And oftentimes people see like the genetic component is just like physical, but I like to talk about like the mental side of that talent as well, where, when we have the collision of coachability, like the mental aspect of things, the physical aspect of things, all these different aspects, even just physical resilience too, to the stresses that you have to handle through the process. That's when you get somebody like a Kobe Bryant or like a Michael Jordan. So, there's a lot of different aspects to that. I think that oftentimes people that lead that reach like the highest level of excellence in anything, it's like usually a perfect storm of multiple things, as well as obviously just the work ethic involved as well. Um, and work ethic, there's like people that say work will be talent and talent, all these different sayings. I think that it's really a combination of things and needs to be a blend of all of it, for somebody to really, really reach like the highest level of something. But working very, very hard can compensate for a lack of talent in some regards, and some of those like things that can be perceived as talents can be developed over time, like mental resilience and mental fortitude, and just the ability, like I said, to be able to handle losses and wins. And a lot of that's like a maturity thing too that comes with experience. Like I said, sometimes competitors get into the sport without any kind of athletic background or competitive background. So it's a lot of maturing process that has to happen over time to develop into that athlete as well.
That time is so valuable, and what you make of it really ends up contributing to who you become through this sport. And if you're not amenable to a changed perspective or maybe a challenged perspective, I think you will get caught up in the dark sides of this sport that can come about. I had a conversation with one of my clients recently, and I mainly focus just on the mental health. And she got into competing for a very surface level reason. And when I was challenging her to consider other reasons to follow through on her plan that have nothing to do with the outcome on stage and or the physique, just strictly for life, why would you follow this plan? She's like, well, I only did it and do it for the physique. And I was like, but as a bodybuilder, just be a fitness influencer if you want that. Because as a bodybuilder, like I personally have found most of my time has been spent in discomfort and in building. Like if I wanted just the physique, like I would just probably maintain for
Mm.
a long period of time and not try to grow. But there are those levels of discomfort. And you make a good point about maturity too, and being able to develop that. But what are some of the specific demands or maybe mental challenges that you've seen come up for clients that kind of draw out that ability to become more resilient?
I like what you mentioned about that athlete that kind of got involved for like the physique kind of thing and not the process. And I think that a lot of those individuals kind of weed themselves out, which I don't think is necessarily a negative thing or a knock on them, because I'm all for trying new things, and like maybe it doesn't work out for you, but in the process, you're learning like what works for you and what doesn't. Maybe there's a different avenue for your motives and all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, it's definitely that's probably one of the biggest things, as well as egos too. Egos play into this thing a lot, and that's across the board. And you never know what you're going to get with an athlete. Whereas can be a lot of resistance in terms of coachability and stuff. And sometimes you have to remind people that you hired me for a reason. You've seen the process, you've seen these things, and you haven't quite gotten the results that you wanted in the past by doing the things that you're doing. And there's a reason that you came on board with me, because you've seen what I've been able to produce. And now we have to trust the process, and you have to trust in me in order to do this. So sometimes there's that resistance piece. And that's another piece of that maturity thing, that it's just, sometimes we have to break that down a little bit and work with somebody. Sometimes we're just like running into a brick wall with people. And, just sometimes that's just the way that things go. So I think that those are some of the biggest challenges with people, is that rude awakening into the sport of, oh, this is a lot and a lot of stress and a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of like the process is long. It's a marathon, not a sprint, all these kinds of things. And then that ego piece and that coachability piece are definitely, I think, probably the biggest challenges for people that I've seen.
I like how you also conceptualize the fact that not everyone needs to continue. You can try it and decide it's not for you. And also, this speaks to comparison. I think when people who've never competed before get into it, you said the glitz and glam earlier. And I think about that, even not even just the pretty bikini and walking in heels and looking like the best you've ever looked in your life, but it's also posting online. And if I'm an athlete who loves the challenge, of course I'm going to glamorize the challenge. I'm going to be all about that grind. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean other people are going to feel that way or want that. So if you see an athlete who's like in love with this process and you try it and you're like, this isn't for me, it doesn't mean you're a bad athlete. It just might mean that this wasn't the right avenue.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was probably the biggest learning lesson for me getting into bodybuilding myself when I started. I didn't quite have the talent piece that I discussed, and I definitely had much more talent towards coaching. So I gravitated towards that, obviously. But one of the biggest like things that I really just ingrained in my brain was that to embrace the process, not the outcome. And it's so cliche, but it's like the most truthful thing in the sport. And one of the biggest things that you just have to embrace is that the process is the performance. Like there's sure you get on stage and you're on stage for a minute or whatever it may be, and then you're off. But the true performance of bodybuilding, where you're performing as an athlete, is in the prep and in the off season phases and through the entire process of putting the entire thing together is what the actual performance of the sport is. It's not like football or basketball where you show up on game day and okay, now it's time to play the game, right? I mean, sure, with those sports too, there's practices and all that kind of stuff, but with bodybuilding, it's like 24/7, 365. Like that is the process, and that's what you need to embrace in this sport, and less about the outcome and the wins and the attention that people may get associated with those wins as well.
Absolutely. And if you're so reliant on the outcome, unfortunately, your process is probably not going to be as healthy as it could be because you're going to be willing to do you could be willing to do whatever it takes in a healthy way, right? Like I used to play volleyball and I was like, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll show up early, I'll stay, I'll go to this camp, I'll go to this, I'll take your feedback, I'll eat it, I'll do whatever I got to do. But as a bodybuilder, I'm like, I'll do whatever I got to do, but I'm not going to take drugs or I'm not going to sacrifice this. And I think we have to know what our boundaries are too heading into this sport because some people don't set any boundaries for themselves because we don't know what to expect. So I think we can utilize your brain here and talk about some of those extremes that sometimes come out of a mindset that's based in ego or based in just wanting the outcome. So what are some things you think are important to consider for a safe and healthy prep, as well as maybe even utilization of some of those enhancements?
So there's like they're they're cohesive, but I like to separate a little bit in terms of like the mental health side of things and then like the physical health side of things. And like the mental health side of things is kind of like everything that we discussed, and not being attached to outcome, because I've seen many times, and even with myself in the past, I'm guilty of this as well. Is like you're chasing that outcome and that win, and then you get it, it's thrilling, you're excited for like a week, and then like your whole identity was wrapped up in that, and now it's gone. And
Mhm.
sometimes, that's what can contribute to like the post-show blues or like people just like completely losing, like they have a whole like midlife crisis basically after a prep and they have no idea what to do with themselves because their whole identity was wrapped up in that show day and in that outcome and in that like wanting to win, right? So making sure that you're not wrapping your entire identity into the sport and not into the win and the outcome is very important for the mental side of things. Because at the end of the day, we're standing on stage half naked and getting like a little trophy. It's not, you know what I mean? So and I take the sport seriously, but at the same time, we have to be a little bit rooted in reality in terms of what this is all about, right? So, but and then in the physical side of things, making sure that you see longevity, and that's kind of can be a parallel in anything with like relationships, with business, with any endeavor in life is like focusing on that longevity piece while still focusing on the present moment as well. I oftentimes talk about kind of toggling like in the center where we're learning some lessons from the past but not digging too deep into the past, then leaning a little bit into the future where we have enough where we're like planning and taking that and we can see the step in front of us, right? But really focusing on the task at hand, on the mental side of things as well. And I think that that helps in terms of decision making, in terms of how far you're pushing your physical body into extremes as well. So, um, and then just making sure that you're doing your due diligence in terms of finding the right coach that's going to be a good fit for you, making sure that you have those conversations with them ahead of time, making sure that they're open to discussing those things and any concerns that you may have in regard to enhancements and stuff like that that you mentioned. Um, and then also, there's I like to also discuss like in individuals kind of risk reward assessment in terms of where they're trying to go and what they're trying to achieve and realistically what risks need to be taken to get there. And I like to use the word risk because it's like everybody has an individual response to all these different things, all the stressors, performance enhancing drugs, anything that we may discuss. And so it's a risk when you get involved. You don't know how your individual response is going to play out in terms of your resilience to these things. And that's a genetic component too, to some extent, where, some bodies are able to handle an immense amount of chronic stress over long, long periods of time and have less backlash than some people that go into one diet phase and their whole system's just like on red alert, right? So
Mhm.
that's a piece that you have to understand, that getting into this is a risk, whether you're using performance enhancing drugs or not, because you're putting an immense amount of chronic stress on your body. I also like to talk about how the human body is like, and the mind are handled to are built to handle very like acute levels of stress and like a lot of rest afterwards, right? So like we're
Mhm.
able to handle like an immense amount of stress like in a moment, like if there's like a fight or flight response or like a do or die kind of situation, and then like a lot of rest and recovery after that, right? But when we're in the bodybuilding sport, it's this extended period of just stress load because we're doing cardio, we're in a deficit, we're probably not sleeping all that great. We have life stresses on top of that. You're may not be managing your stress to the best of your ability in terms of just like how you're responding to daily kind of stressors. And all these things just pile up on top of you over long, extended periods of time. And that's when we start to see backlash. So it's important to be realistic with yourself and understanding that that's what the sport involves. And, hopefully finding a coach that will help you to understand that there is a risk reward assessment. If you go to a coach and you're like, I want to be an Olympian, it's like, okay, well, there's going to be a lot involved in this, potentially a lot of risk involved. And that's why I like the word risk, because it's not inherent necessarily. It's kind of like we're gonna have to see how this plays out. So it's important to note those things and be realistic with yourself when you're getting involved in the sport, and being able to take responsibility for those risks and rewards as well. And then making sure that you're working with a coach that's on the same page with that stuff, right? Because I think that higher level coaches are going to be more um, on board with like understanding that and being like, okay, well, like let's push the envelope together, or like let's like play it safe together, right? And that's kind of how I like to do things. Where if an athlete comes to me and they're like, hey, like this is realistically what I want to do. I've thought about this a lot. I'm willing to push the envelope. Then it's like, okay, let's do that together. Let's discuss the risks involved, that kind of thing. And then vice versa, if somebody's wanting to be more responsible, it's like, hey, there's still gonna be a lot of stresses involved, and you can still have a lot of negative backlash inside the body. So, but yeah, hopefully all that makes sense.
That was great. Yeah, that was a fantastic little rant there because I enjoyed listening and I think you had so many good points. So one of the things that stood out to me was the toggling. Like, don't spend too much time in the past, don't spend too much time in the future. Let's address what's going on right now. And then you highlighted the importance of being prepared for risks and knowing what your risk tolerance is. Because I'm going to always refer to mental health, so I'm not going to preface it with mental health, like you have risks and you have protective factors. So it doesn't mean we ignore the risks. We know that if you're driving down the road, there could be a pothole. Are we going to just pretend like there's no potholes? Like, no, you're going to be like, what do I do if there is a pothole? What do I do if there is water on the road? So you want to have a coach, I believe, like you said, who's going to be prepared to address those things with you and handle them the way that's going to be most healthy and beneficial to what you desire and you're comfortable with. But if we ignore the fact that there's risks in the decisions we make, I know as a natural athlete, like I'm having to do a lot too, and someone who's enhanced is also doing a lot. But like the approach of being natural is also not the healthiest sometimes because I'm doing extremes just to get that result.
Mhm.
And I know that that's not always great. And then it brought me to this. I was thinking, you bring up that there's other life stressors that need to be addressed. As a competitor, you also said it's 24/7, 365. And I think we have a magnifying glass on variables that most of the general population don't. So we're going to be mindful of stress. We're going to be mindful of our blood work. We're going to be mindful of how does that one joint feel that's been giving us problems all day? Like we're going to think about those things at a level that most wouldn't. So if you're not prepared to handle, I think even just the demand of having an eye on everything and being prepared to address it's going to be difficult to take yourself to the level that most I think want to when they enter the sport.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I like how you kind of touched on the fact that it's not going to be necessarily a healthy sport no matter what route you go, whether using performance enhancements or not. And that's just due to the total stress load that it puts on the body over long, extended periods of time. And the human body just doesn't appreciate when you do that. So you're going to have negative downstream effects, and focusing and being realistic with that and focusing on recovery afterwards and making sure that you're being responsible with these things, understanding how they work and working with a coach that understands how they work, and then reviewing, labs and stuff like that, and seeing what the negative impact was, like what was the damage, and then how can we like bring us back to a place of homeostasis to some extent. The body likes a lot of balance, and it likes acute extremes, but it doesn't like to be in extremes for long periods of time. Like you'll have the pendulum swinging if like somebody's just sedentary all the time. Like the pendulums are like to swing or like just kind of be resting in the center. They don't like to just be held up in one area all the time. So you have somebody that's like completely sedentary, or you have a bodybuilding athlete that's just under an immense amount of stress load 24/7 all the time. So yeah, that's kind of one of the analogies I like to give.
That's such a great analogy. That's such a great picture and image. Like I can step and I'm being driven crazy by this light on my face. So I'm gonna like shift over here because like it's starting to distract me mentally. So let me see if this makes it better. It does. Woo! It was starting to get on my nerves. If you guys are watching the video, there's like this line on my face that I don't look at myself often I don't like to look at myself when I'm talking to somebody. And the fact that it was there, I'm like fixated on it. So anyway, yeah, what you were saying is spot on. And I think too, knowing that we're putting ourselves under these demands and these extremes also leads to another issue that I see in the industry, which is people address extremes with other extremes. So they're not always trying to find that middle ground where they can just like cruise as an athlete. Instead, it's like, let me go do the most extreme to get here. Oh, now bodybuilding ruined my life. And now I'm done. Instead of like, how can I do it better? And I think what you're promoting here is like, let's not stay in one place too long. Let's be mindful of what's bringing us to those high highs and those low lows, and find a way to like mitigate the risk and handle it. So in your professional opinion, what is the most ideal way to establish a longevity focused approach for a client?
A lot of the times I have to work with athletes on shifting their focus towards, and this is like general population stuff too, where people are seeking out like the magic pill to something, right? Like, what is that one thing that I can take, or that one little strategy that I can do? What's that one missing piece and I try to explain to people, because I can get pretty complex with things, and I can dig into like pretty complex aspects of physiology and stuff, but it's a lot of these things are just so simple. It's just the stress load that's placed on the body over extended periods of time, and then pulling that off. And there's so many low hanging fruit that we can grab to like handle that better. And it's like they're like the most simple things that people don't that people just completely brush off because they're looking for something. I don't know. It's right there in front of them, right? And they're not quite doing it, or these little tiny tasks that can be done to better regulate these things, like sleep hygiene, or um, focusing on, just reading a book before bed, staying off your phone, like not playing video games that are just like super high stress. Like all these little things are contributing to all that stress load that you're handling as a competitor, and they're just like those are things that can be pretty easily removed and replaced with other better habits. So these are like the low hanging fruit that you can just be grabbing. Sleep hygiene is probably the biggest one, to be honest. And I think that if a lot of people got that better aligned, they would have a lot better outcomes long term. And then also like managing training volume, which a lot of athletes don't quite have a focus on, and some coaches don't quite have a focus on as well, is like managing that waxing and waning and toggling with training volume, and knowing when to deload and devolume, knowing when to pull cardio out, because all these things are little stress loads. So when somebody starting to, and also making sure that you're tracking biofeedback in terms of monitoring fatigue accumulation. So understanding that all these things are contributing to that overall that complete total load of stress and fatigue on the body. Once you start to see that accumulate, knowing how to back off on it, knowing how to create something more sustainable for the individual athlete and their fatigue responses that they get. Because some athletes, I'll put them on a pretty low volume kind of program and have cardio relatively low, and they're at maintenance or even in a surplus, and they train for like 3 weeks, and all of a sudden they're just like their fatigue's through the roof. They're feeling agitated. They're not sleeping well. Everything's just like they're bloating. They're having digestional problems, and it's like, okay, so like, and then there's other athletes where it's like we can slam them with stress load over long periods of time, and they're perfectly fine. And it's just like, well, there's not really any point in us deloading or anything because like we're just gonna be missing out on progress, you know. So understanding your body and having a coach that understands those things too. These are very just like low hanging fruit things that you can manage better to have a better net positive outcome long term, and then just more longevity.
That's why I think it's important to have a coach. Let them manage all of this. Let them come to you and say, hey, what's going on here? Versus as an athlete, like when you don't have, like you mentioned Kobe Bryant, you mentioned Michael Jordan. You think they're coaching themselves? Like, no, even the best of the best of the best know the value of a coach. And I think everything you just outlined, like you were pulling out specific biofeedback that you're looking for as a coach, that if an athlete was trying to coach themselves and identify every single piece of information, one, we're going to have a bias as an athlete and a blind spot. We may not see it. And two, that's a lot to already focus on. Like prepping for a show or coming out of a show is stressful enough, let alone now looking for all of those biofeedback markers or even like there's things I'm sure you notice as a coach, a client suddenly is talking to you differently and you're like, you sound more stressed than usual. Maybe we should pull it back, or maybe we need to address that. And you'd mentioned the sleep hygiene too. And when you said low hanging fruits, in my mind, I was just thinking about how we tend to function on this level of extremes because it's predictable. But if you tell me, like, don't look at your phone before bed, but that's a very nice thing to do, right? Like, oh, I can just mindlessly scroll, whatever. I'm going to have so much more resistance to doing that because one, it's not, I don't know if that's going to get me a result, but I know for a fact me scrolling before bed brings me some sort of, I don't know, dopamine hit, gets me excited. I like it. It's relaxing. I don't have to think about my day. But if I put that phone away, I don't know what's going to happen. So it's like we kind of latch on to things that are predictable. But as you said, it's those tiny changes that end up bringing us to homeostasis in a more predictable way long term than that short-term burst of like, let's do this and not actually evaluate for the impact of it.
Absolutely. And you know, the extremes is the finding balance within bodybuilding is going to be relatively difficult. So being realistic with understanding that you are going to be in mental and physical extremes. And when you're putting yourself through a prep, you're depriving yourself of a lot of like life's pleasures, right? So whether that's food, whether that's like you know, sometimes people really like refrain from going out and seeing friends and like social interaction and all these like base level fundamental like pleasures that we're like built to handle as humans. So when you're depriving yourself of all that for long periods of time, like that pendulum's going to swing back the other direction, and you're going to be seeking out pleasures in any way you can. And you know, a lot of the times you're going to, even though like bodybuilding teaches a lot of like delayed gratification. I think that when that pendulum's swinging back, like you're desperate for like any sort of instant gratification to like fill that void almost. So it's important to note those things and be self-aware of those things and try to keep them like under control and try to like find that balance. I think that's where a lot of people have an issue or a problem with like reverse dieting as well, where they blow out their reverse diet, and it's because you've been so deprived of everything, and you know, you're like your mind's on all these pleasures that you get to enjoy after the show. And it's like being self-aware of those things and conscious of those things is very important and going to help you a lot. And understanding that you're putting yourself into extremes and the pendulum is going to swing back. And it's just like that conscious awareness and like focus on just like, let's calm this thing down, right? And then grabbing those low-hanging fruit to like help assist that in terms of like the pendulum just calming down a little bit, bringing you back to center so that you can lean back in and head into those extremes again at some point if this sport is what you're passionate about.
Definitely. And when you commit to those extremes, find how they're benefiting your life. So when it is time to pull back on them, you still see a reason for doing them even to a lesser level. So for example, like if you're used to doing an hour of cardio in your prep and all you're thinking about how you can't wait to be able to sleep in again or whatever it might be, at least take the time to identify how that 1 hour of cardio in the morning is actually benefiting your life. Because then when you're transitioning out of it, you'll kind of miss it. And you'll start to value those things about prep and about competing more than you value the things that I don't know that I like the word sacrifice, but I'll use it for the context that you've sacrificed for the pursuit of this level of excellence. And when you can really embrace that and go, you know what, this is something I'm choosing, and therefore I'm going to be happy with the choice that I'm making. When you hit your reverse diet and you hit your post show, my goal for athletes is that they'll get to that and they won't even be thinking about, oh, what am I going to go eat after this? What am I going to go do later today? Next week, I'm going to go to all these bars. I'm going to go to happy hour again. It's like, why? Like, why are you craving so much to go to something? And if you restricted it through your prep and your prep is benefiting you, why would you want to go back there? And I think we have to always reward ourselves for the decisions we make that move us in the direction of our goals. Because then no matter the outcome, we're like, well, it was worth the process, like you said earlier.
Yeah, I like that little nuance that you put on sacrifice. It's definitely like you've chosen to prioritize this over other things, essentially. So, and it's not inherently, but I guess sacrifice can have some negative connotation to it as well. So, I like that you said that. And then I think that why people tend to like they're like not finding fulfillment in those instant pleasures afterwards, like you mentioned, and they start to miss those other things, is because they're reminded that those like delayed gratification tasks that they were doing, all these things that accumulated into like something that was much more fulfilling than these instant gratifications where you just get that dopamine hit and then it's over, right? They realize that those things are so much more fulfilling, and it's like a unpleasant reminder to some extent. And I think that the more like conscious awareness you can have over these things, like the better self-control you can have and the better you can find strategies to find regain that balance when you've been pushing to extremes. And I've like I said, I've participated in a lot of action sports. I've done all this myself, and I'm very guilty of pushing myself to a far extents in terms of extremes, even just like how I handle my business. Sometimes I'm like up super late, super early mornings, that kind of thing, running myself into the ground at times. So just being conscious of that, and conscious of the fact that you've chosen to do that, and then trying to find strategies and being aware of like that pendulum swinging back, and then just trying to make good choices and reminding yourself that those tasks that result in more delayed gratification are going to be the ones that are going to be more fruitful and more fulfilling in your life in general. And that's across the board, not just in bodybuilding, that's in relationships, business, anything that you could possibly pursue in life.
So true. And I'm really glad you brought up the demands as a coach, because this is something I've been asking every coach, which is what are the mental and physical and even emotional tolls that coaching actually can take on you? And what do you do to handle those demands?
It can be, there's a lot of pressure on us and a lot of responsibility. The outcome of an athlete very heavily rides on us, no matter how things play out or why things are not playing out the way that they are, or why they do play out the way that we want them to, all those different things. And so there's an immense amount of stress. We're under, not myself necessarily, but I do see a lot of other coaches under an immense amount of scrutiny at times, even for their personal lives and all these different things. So we're under a big spotlight in terms of just how we're exposed to the world and the level of responsibility. And then, you know, so it's a lot, and it's a lot of pressure, and it's a responsibility we put on ourselves, not only as coaches, but just as entrepreneurs that are running our own businesses and stuff. I had a conversation with my business mentor about this the other day, and he was mentioning like, hey, like this is what you've chosen to do. Like as an entrepreneur, and when you're in a leadership position and you are putting yourself out there in that way, people are going to dislike you. People are going to hate you at times. That people are going to have perceived negative experiences with you, even though that you may have put everything you possibly had into that situation and put your best foot forward every single time. So it's accepting that that is just the reality, no matter how good your intentions constantly are, no matter how hard you work, no matter how much you invest into your athletes. Like there's always going to be people that don't like you or have a perceived negative experience with you or whatever it may be. So a lot of it is very similar to what I would recommend to a bodybuilder, is like a lot of those low hanging fruit in terms of just like self care, sleep hygiene, focusing on that conscious awareness of, like I said, understanding the pressure that you're under, understanding it in a more nuanced fashion rather than just being like, oh, I'm under a lot of pressure. Making sure that you're taking care of yourself and working out and having a relatively balanced lifestyle as a coach as well, for the mental health aspect of things. And then I talk about too that part of why I like coaching is because I'm a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, and like I get to experience that more frequently with athletes than I would if I was just a competitor myself. Like if I just had one show a year, that's like my thing, right? But with athletes, it's like sometimes it's like, oh, we have back-to-back shows like every weekend, like all month, you know what I mean? At times. So it's like super exciting, but like, there's times where I have to really draw back and isolate myself a little bit to recover mentally. So just being conscious of your mental health as a coach is very important. And I don't think that's talked about much. I think that people just often throw rocks at coaches instead of like having some level of empathy for the amount of pressure and responsibility that we have, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it's what we accept. And it's a choice that we make when we get into this profession.
Definitely. That's why I like to ask that question about the toll it takes on coaches, because I think there needs to be some level of that empathy coming in, because a coach is highly invested in your success as an athlete. I think if they're a good coach, they will be. And it sounds like that's how you are. And so there's a relationship that develops with clients. And when that relationship is impacted by maybe negative emotions or an undesired outcome, it does take a toll on both parties, not just the athlete. And as you described too, you are running a business. So even though it's a business and you're looking at your impact and you're looking at your bottom line as well, there's that relational aspect to it that you can't get away from when you're in a service based
Mm.
industry and role. And when you mentioned that you've had to be mindful of like your time, and you know that you made this choice to like push yourself to this level, and sometimes for you that looks like different self-care. I
Mhm.
I go through this myself, and I think of like my life on a threshold. And so I'm like, okay, if my threshold for life right now is going to be, let's say it's out of 20 and I'm like pushing at 19, I can only sustain that for so long before I can't, but I'm willing to test it. I'm willing to work like 12 hours a day, let's say, to see if I can sustain that. If I can't, I'll pull it back, because what matters is the product being produced. And so, much like an athlete, like testing our threshold, I think gives us so much insight, and it creates a compassionate approach versus a critical one. It's like, let's look at the data, let's look at the result, let's be compassionate with ourselves in testing these things, and then explore from there. And it sounds like that's what you've really been doing in your business. Sometimes you're pushing it and sometimes you're pulling it back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I learned that actually pretty early on when I started personal training because I started doing that like nearly a decade ago. And, there were weeks where I was working 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week as a personal trainer, just like on the gym floor nonstop and just like pushing to those extremes and like finding that threshold for myself. Like, how far can I push this? Like, do I need to back off? Like, when am I burning out? How long is it taking for me to burn out? Like that kind of thing. Can I just prevent burnout altogether? Those different aspects of things. And yeah, it's like a constant kind of toggle for us as coaches as well in terms of like how far we lean in and knowing when to pull back. And I think it's kind of cool too if you're a coach that understands those things with athletes, you understand it with yourself too, or
Mhm.
maybe you understand it better with athletes because you understand it so well with yourself, right? So that's one thing that I'm very in tune with myself and I'm very consciously aware in terms of where I'm at in terms like with where my nervous system is at and where I'm at recovery wise mentally and physically. So I really try to focus in on those things and navigate to the best of my ability.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. How much and how deep you go with yourself can be reflected in how deep you're willing to go with a client. And part of one of the most important, if not the most important part of being a coach, you said, it's like there's that responsibility. And I think this is really a good time for me to ask you how you make your clients' health a priority, especially when you are sometimes having to take it to that top of the threshold.
hmm Yeah, like I said, a lot of it is understanding the individual's risk reward assessment, and they're kind of our responsibility to kind of have that conversation and figure out what that looks like, and then proceeding from there, right? And then just making sure that you have an open line of communication when it comes to, especially with like performance enhancing drugs, monitoring side effects, all these different kinds of things, and making sure that we're mitigating that to the best of our ability, but also understanding that there may be negative impacts not just from that, but any area of these different stressors that we're placing on the body, right? So, understanding that and then making sure that we're recovering to the best of our ability and being responsible within that like wherever they are on the spectrum of risk reward, making sure that we're trying to be as responsible within and staying in that position the entire time instead of like, oh, let's just push it even a little bit further without me like talking to them about it or whatever it may be, right?
Mhm.
So making sure that we're just aware of like wherever we set that needle, trying to stay there, and then making sure that like afterwards we're recovering to the best of our ability and all of that. So I think that that's like the biggest piece. And I may differ from other coaches in that regard because you know, if an athlete comes to me and they really want to push things and they have high level goals, sometimes that's going to take high level risk. And that's just how life works. Like if you want to achieve something that's incredibly great, like you're going to have to take risks to get there. And I think that not enough people are realistic with themselves in regards to that. And then also the other way is like, you know, people are like, I don't want to take any risks, but I want to achieve something that's incredibly great. And it's like, well, let's be a little bit more realistic here. So finding where that needle lands with people and then trying to stay there and then having those recurring discussions too, like after a process has like say we've gone through a contest prep, it's like, okay, we're kind of heading into the next realm here. Like where are we at now? You know what I mean? And kind of hitting that milestone, resetting, and like where are we at on the spectrum now in terms of what we're willing to do here. And also like realistically, here's the results that we produce. This is the momentum we have, and realistically, this is like kind of where we're heading. Because once you, especially athletes that are new to the sport and haven't competed before, it's kind of hard to gauge, you know, quite how much talent they have. Because you know, genetics are just a very large part of the sport, whether people want to accept it or not. And sometimes you don't know what you're going to be able to unlock with an athlete in terms of genetics until you've started to go through these processes. So being realistic with somebody afterwards and be like, okay, this has been crazy. Like you've been able to make really dramatic progress. This is kind of what your trajectory looks like. And these are kind of the risks that we need to continue to take to get to that goal that you have. So a lot of it's just the individual athlete, their risk reward assessment, as well as just being realistic with themselves, as well as me helping them find that like realistic kind of space in their mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I like how you're using the term realistic because I think it's good to dream, but also be mindful of like, okay, if you have this goal, here are some objectives you're going to have to hit or at least attempt to hit. And if you don't hit them, it's fine. You just weren't ready for those objectives yet. Like, let's pull it back. And you said reset. Like, if someone has just completed preps, like, let's reevaluate before we decide what's next. I think that's a really key point, too. And you've probably answered this through all of your answers so far, but I'm going to ask you outright and see if there's anything you'd like to add, which is what do you think makes a coach a good coach?
Um, I think it's just like when you asked what makes somebody a champion, and I think it's kind of a perfect storm of these different aspects in terms of um like their own mentality and understanding of these things and understanding the mental side of things and actually coaching people, not just writing programs. I think that that's a big piece of it. I think that some of the highest level coaches and coaches that I respect a lot, like have learned a lot from like looking at other coaches in other sports and stuff too, and like what have their strategies been? How do they build a culture? How do they do all these different aspects to what how somebody can take somebody with talent and turn it into greatness, right? So you know, I look at that aspect of things. Obviously, like understanding physiology and constantly progressing in terms of knowledge. We're all at different spots, and there's so many different avenues in terms of what we need to learn as a coach. But constantly progressing in terms of knowledge and understanding. Um, Having like I guess just good intentions, I suppose, for the most part, is usually a good thing.
That's a
Um,
great point. No one said that
yeah,
yet. I like that.
yeah. I mean, if your intentions are just to boast as many wins as possible all the time, and like you really don't care about anything else, and that's like your top priority, then I don't know. You may need to reevaluate things just a little bit. It may be a little bit difficult for you to sleep at night. I'm not sure. I'm not that person. So, but yeah. So a lot of different aspects to that. I think that like an athletic background does help. It's not necessary in terms of like just having that mentality and that maturity yourself in terms of understanding sport. I think some of the best coaches in history that are in other sports too have a background in that sport. Like they were like super passionate about it. They were just like everything was about that sport and they just didn't quite have the talent to reach that higher level. And so they placed all that passion into other athletes. So I think that a lot of good coaches have that aspect to them as well. And I see a lot of coaches that I respect are similar to me, where we have been bodybuilders in the past, but we've like gravitated into just coaching because we're able to channel all that passion into multiple athletes instead of just ourselves, because we didn't quite have that talent to reach that higher level. And that's why I think it's kind of ridiculous when some people are like, your coach should have a pro card. I'm like, that's like a ridiculous thing. But anyway, that's besides the point.
No, I love it. I love when coaches speak their mind like that because I totally agree. If the only reason you're hiring someone is because they have excelled in it, again, that speaks to the whole why are you focused on the outcome? And that's not going to get you very far. And you mentioned other coaches in other sports. So now, like, I got to know. And it's interesting as you were saying that, I was like, okay, I have this book that I'm like reading. And
Oh,
it's
I
Lou.
love it.
Have you read this? Lou Holtz
No, I
or heard of
haven't,
him?
but I'm going to now.
So winning every day, and he is not, he was like, I couldn't do what they're doing, but he gets it, you know? And I think, and I haven't read very far, but right when you said that, I thought about that. And I was like, that is such a great point because you can be so good and have an eye for something and just know what needs to be done. And yet you maybe didn't excel in it yourself. And especially a sport like bodybuilding. I mean, like you said, we don't want to acknowledge genetics plays a role, but yeah, I mean, if you're gonna step on stage as a bikini competitor with a, let's say, a figure competitor's look, like, yeah, that's not gonna do as good as it would if you were in the figure category. So even as a coach, like, if you don't take yourself or don't want to take yourself to that pro level, or you haven't been able to achieve it and you don't have a desire to because you like the coaching, and you're so invested in that and you have knowledge in that, I will trust you more because you've invested in making other people better versus just yourself, like you said.
Exactly. And like we've mentioned multiple times so far in this recording, is that coaching takes a lot. It's so much responsibility and it's very heavy on you, and so is competing. So it's very difficult to do both.
Mm.
And there are coaches that do both gracefully, and I respect that a lot. But there are many coaches that don't do it quite so well. And when they get into contest prep, that's when all their athletes are like, "Hey, like, you're really not paying attention to me at all." And so I think I'm a little bit of a proponent of kind of going all in on your one thing and that one skill and that one passion that you have. So I've chosen to really just invest all of it into coaching athletes myself. And I still like, love to train. I still have a relatively structured nutritional program that I'm on and all these different things, but a lot of it's just for self-care and all that kind of stuff. So, it's always like a personal passion of mine, but I usually, if it takes away from my ability to coach at the highest level I can, I choose not to do it. So like even sometimes with training, it's like, your training's like hypertrophy training, you really have to push the envelope to some extent to create an adaptation, right? And there is that level of fatigue that you feel after like a heavy leg day or whatever it may be. That level of brain fog, your nervous system's just all out of whack, right? Or you're stuck in like a fight or flight response coming back from the gym and you have check-ins to respond to or whatever it may be. So I try to like be conscious of that. And if it takes away from my business as a coach, then I try to mitigate that to the best of my ability.
Those are really great demands that you just pointed out on coaches who also compete or who train and live this lifestyle too. And like you said, I don't think there's a problem with doing both, but I do think that's a good point for listeners to consider when interviewing coaches to hire, asking them if they are actively competing or living this lifestyle, maybe asking them how they manage it. So you have an expectation, because I've heard stories like girls hiring competitors and then they're like, yeah, well, it doesn't matter. They haven't responded for 2 weeks because they're prepping for the show. I'm like, you're still a paying client. It does technically matter. So knowing what to expect, I think, is very important. And when you know how to if a coach tells you they know how to manage their energy, that's great. Like, it doesn't sound like you're going to go do a massive leg day before a big check-in day, like that just, it won't add up. Just like when I was working in the counseling field and prepping, it was like, I can't effectively go as a counselor and do what I got to do unless I'm getting my cardio done by this time or my training, because then I'm not fed, or I've eaten most of my meals. I can't focus. I'm not, like, I haven't slept. I just won't do that to somebody. So there's certain things you have to be able to manage. Now, we're kind of getting controversial, so I'm going to throw this one at you. What do you have to say to people who think that competing is political and a lot of it has to do with politics and teams play a role in that?
So I don't think it's what people think it is in terms of politics. I think that the connotation on what politics is within bodybuilding is different from what politics is anywhere else. Politics are everywhere. Politics is just like how people navigate within like hierarchy and all these different things, right? So like at your local gym, there's like politics that are going on. There's drama, there's gossip. People are like trying to control their narrative, whatever it may be, right? So this is just it's human nature to be like this and do things that way. So I mean, anything that you get involved with where there's like some level of organization to it, especially, there's going to be politics involved to some extent, right? Um, and whether that's like conscious bias towards things or subconscious bias towards things or whatever it may be, I just don't think it's quite what people think it is in terms of like, oh, they won because of this or they won because they're with that coach or whatever it may be. I don't think that that's necessarily a thing. I could be wrong. You never know. But the way I see politics within bodybuilding is how I would see politics within any other organization that you're getting involved in. It's just the way that things are. And you kind of have to accept that sometimes there may be some like subconscious biases in people's minds or whatever it may be. I just don't think it's as intentional as people make it out to be. And I don't think I'm very big on just like nuance and like gray area. So like I'm not like there's politics or there's no politics. It's just like, hey, let's have a little bit more nuance of a discussion about it, right? Because it's just arguments from both sides. I'm like any like organized sport, there's gonna be politics involved, there's gonna be like levels of gossip, there's gonna be people that don't like each other, or like maybe a judge doesn't like a specific coach and they have some level of subconscious bias towards it. I just don't think it's quite as intentional as people make it out to be.
That's such a great way of looking at it. I could not agree more. Like, I remember when I got into the sport, there were naysayers who were like, oh, it's all political. Like, you gotta do expletives with judges and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, what? Like, really? You think all of these people are doing that? I don't think so. And I think it's a good way of like maybe playing a disownership of responsibility too for a loss or for, oh, and it's like, oh, I don't want to take the blame for that. So I'm going to blame politics instead of being like, I had a role.
Yeah, I loved your post yesterday too, because I think that that's a big aspect of all this mentally is like accountability, like a level of accountability. I think a lot of these things where we see these competitors bashing anything, whether it's politics or whether it's like bodybuilding as a whole ruined my life or whatever it
Yeah.
is, like having some level of accountability. I think it's just a lot of external projection of just like that lack of responsibility and accountability for one's own decisions and actions that they've taken or routes that they've decided to, and just accepting the fact maybe it just wasn't meant for them and that's how things played out and that's it.
Right. We only want to blame because it gives us insight into how to prevent it. And
Mhm.
it's like putting blame on something external, it doesn't require much work from us. So when you take that personal responsibility, suddenly you're like, oh gosh, that's not a great reflection in the mirror that I just held up to myself. And you got to do the work to move through that.
Yeah, and I think that that's a big piece to our pressure as coaches too, is because we're like the personification of like that outlet for external projection and like blame, right?
Mhm.
Because like everything else is like it's like, oh, it's politics or bodybuilding as a whole, but it's like, oh, here's a person I can like really dig into here in terms of like my blame and lack of accountability. But it's if you're aware of it as a coach and you're conscious of that and conscious that a lot of times it's just projections, you're able to navigate it professionally and handle things in a professional manner. And that's what I always try to do myself.
That's so good because I think feeding into that can sometimes backfire. I think it's good to stand up for yourself, but also when it doesn't benefit you in any way, it's like, why bother? And that's just where that person's at. And I've seen that all the time. Like people will post their side by sides, be like, my coach did this to me. It's like, well, it must have been other things at play going on that. And sometimes you shoot and you miss. I'm sorry, that's just the truth. Like that's any sport. You shoot and you miss. It's not always gonna be a home run. You're gonna get a strike. You're not gonna, and I'm not talking bowling, I mean, you're really not gonna always get it. That's just what happens. And as an athlete, we have to be committed to constant self-reflection, as you said, like you got to be tuned in. And while the coaches, yes, have a huge responsibility, as you also said, it doesn't mean they're the only ones responsible for what's going on. And I really like how you said too, there's nuance in politics. Sometimes it's like maybe an underlying bias. There's going to be drama. Politics is not just who wins and who doesn't. And I like the NPC and the IFBB personally because they'll throw out the highs and lows. And I think that's a really good way of mitigating it. They try to keep judges off the panel who coach whoever's on stage. So I really like that. And from the judges I've connected with, it's funny because they'll say sometimes they feel like they are almost judging harder the more immersed in the sport they get and the more girls that they meet because they know the work that's gone into that athlete's journey and they want to make sure and they've done it. They've probably done it or they fell in love with the sport and they're like, I respect it enough to be critical to the level that needs to be done so that these girls and men get what they deserve.
Yeah, 100%. That's a good point. That a lot of the coaches have competed before, and like it would be pretty hard for them to act unfairly in that regard unless they have ill intent. So I don't think anybody. I think most people in general. I try to, like I said earlier, I try to see the bright side of things at all times. I think that most people have great intentions or are just doing the best they can, and
Yeah.
I choose to see life that way. So I find it hard to believe that a judge has such ill intent that they would treat an athlete that way when especially if they've gone through the sport themselves.
Totally. Yeah, that's so true. Sometimes, and going back to your point earlier about content creation as well, like I just spoke with my dad this morning. I was like, oh, I posted this video I'm really proud of on YouTube, but it like blew up in 24 hours. And it was like me discussing the dangers of self-diagnosis and mental health. And I got these comments from people who were saying, and my dad was like, you have so much courage to put yourself out there though. And you're facilitating conversations that need to be had. And before we recorded, I mentioned that to you, like I got flack for some of the coaches series, but like it's about facilitating conversations. It's like giving people insight. And when your intentions are good and you know that your intentions are good, I think you can almost sometimes handle that a little bit differently or better because you're like, brush it off. I know what I meant. I know what's in my heart. God knows my heart. We're good. Move on. And that can be a hard pill to swallow. And maturity as a coach or as a content creator definitely has lended that easier. But I know it is a challenge. And it again comes down to like responsibility for your actions, like thinking it through. And sometimes we learn the hard way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't like to cry over spilled milk, and it's a lot easier to do that if your intentions are pretty pure most of the time. So, I sleep well at night, and if people dislike me or whatever it may be, then that's fine. I wish them the best, and I wish them success. And that's like I am proud to say that I haven't had like a ton of these negative experiences. It's more of what I've been discussing is what I see with other coaches, and I have
Yeah.
a lot of empathy for them, to be honest, because it's like, or an athlete comes to me and they're just ranting about their past coaching experience, and I'm just like nodding and like, I take it all with a grain of salt because I don't know all the context, and I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, that coach sucked. Come to my team. I try to like take it with a grain of salt to some extent and know that there's always two sides to every story, right? So that's an important piece of it, but it's a lot easier to move on and not cry over things when you treat things with grace and kindness and know that you had good intent the entire time. So even if somebody's attacking you, just being like, hey, like I understand that you had a perceived negative experience with me, and it's like, I truly wish you success. And now sometimes that pisses people off even more. So that's even more of a tell that it's a projection, right? If
Yeah.
that pisses them off more, and you're like applauding them, and they go and get a pro card with another coach or whatever it may be, and you're like truly happy for them, like
Yeah.
people can't stand that. And I think that that's more of a tell that it may be coming from um, more of an unconscious negative place than they may think. And I still give them like, I still take that with a grain of salt because it's like, hey, maybe you're just not aware of how you're treating things and stuff. I still wish you the best. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm at a lot of peace with myself because I treat things that way.
I think that's so insightful for not just listeners who compete and have to go through these types of feedback, even from judges and the putting yourself out there in that way to get that feedback, but also for other coaches or people considering coaches, like, or considering becoming a coach. These are important things to keep in the back of your mind. Having positive intentions is beautiful. Now, you mentioned, you're not going to listen to what someone says and like eat it up and be like, yeah, come to me. So Here's a hypothetical round question for you, okay? Now, forgive me if I misstep on how I ask this because I've always struggled to ask this. So let me see. Let me get this out, and then if I need to backtrack, I will. So if I'm 1 year into competing, so it was my first year as a competitor, I actually got a few overall wins. So I'm doing really, really well. And my goal is to get my pro card, but I've never stepped on the national stage. And I've been working with the same coach for this entire time period. But now I'm looking for a new approach. Why would I hire you?
Why would you hire me in myself or just like in general?
Yeah.
Um, it would be dependent on a lot of the context. So, why are you looking for a new approach? Like, what isn't quite working for you? Are you looking for, and I'm big, like, in terms of understanding somebody's needs when they come to me. So, a lot of that's going to be based off of that. It's not like what sets me apart necessarily inherently, but more like, how can I better fit your needs as a competitor that aren't being currently met? Because you've had a lot of success with a coach already, and you've probably built a relationship with them. So, like, why are you not? Why are you looking for a new approach? Like, is it that you're missing a certain aspect of the programming that we need to focus on more? Do they not have a priority on training programming? Are they not analyzing training footage? I would lean into that. So a lot of it's like dependent on the context and what their needs are, and then leaning into those areas where they need a little bit more assistance. And then I would focus on that for sure.
I'm glad you mentioned training, Sean. Thank you. You make my segue very easy.
Uh,
So, your big thing is prioritizing training and how your clients train. You even work with clients in person to train them. So, I should ask first how you prioritize training with clients, and do you only work with your clients?
and to be transparent really quick, I no longer do in-person training. That bio I sent you was from a while ago. So just so nobody starts blowing up my DMs trying to
I was
get
gonna say you're gonna get like all these, you're gonna be working 70 hours a week soon.
But the training aspect of things is really like my bread and butter. That was like my primary passion. Like when I got into training and like working out when I was a teenager, like the training was what really drew me in. Understanding biomechanics, understanding physics, the physics behind it, even like machine analysis, understanding machines and how they operate and how they're engineered, and like all these different things. I just really nerded out about that stuff. And that's why I was like so focused on personal training for such a long time. And I was working such long hours is because I genuinely loved that. And so like although I was doing some coaching and stuff, and my coaching business became so demanding that I had to stop doing personal training, like the training aspect is carried into what I'm currently doing. And I chased like so many, I ended up with like 9, 10 certifications under my belt just in regards to like training and resistance training and stuff. So I chased, like, I was flying all over the country, like seeking out anybody I could learn from, like
Wow.
seeing them in person, going to practicals in person, learning from some of the best in the industry when it came to resistance training and understanding like resistance profiles and strength profiles and all these different aspects to training, especially within the bodybuilding realm and how they relate to the bodybuilding realm, because they can relate to really any realm that you place it in terms of training in general, but how it relates to bodybuilding specifically. So that's been like such a big focus for me over the years. And I translate that into my coaching. And I think that a lot of coaches or many coaches probably have a lot of experience in terms of like the nutrition and PEDs and that kind of stuff. And I'm kind of bringing in like the training aspect of things. And I bring experience where I have, it's very hands-on, like so much trial and error in person with hundreds and hundreds of clients throughout the years, understanding the differences in somebody's limb lengths and how they may be able to, or how we may be able to better set up an exercise for them, whatever it may be, right? So it's a big focus of mine. Training programming is huge for me. Understanding how it relates to the total stress load is huge for me. Understanding fatigue management is huge. I think it's one of the biggest pieces of the stress management piece that we discuss, that can be better managed. I find it hard to believe that um, and I don't want to bash anybody,
Yeah.
but like like having an athlete just being like do whatever you want in the gym, because it's such a big aspect to the entirety of the programming, and understanding how to back off and when to lean in, especially when it comes to fat loss. So I find it hard to believe that some people completely dismiss it, but it's very important to me. And my competition athletes, I require that I program their training. I require that they send in training footage. I'm looking at training execution every week, breaking things down. I do Loom video reviews, so I'm like, I'll be standing up out of my chair and like showing them how to position themselves, everything. So I get like really into it, and it's like really probably the biggest passion of mine when it comes to bodybuilding. So.
I'm really glad that you said that that surprises you actually, because I was thinking it when you said, I'm like, yeah, I think lately what we've seen is a deprioritization of training and more focus on other things. And yet so many of us fell in love with the gym and maybe not to the level you did, wanting to study the machine mechanics, but that's, that's a cool thing that sets you apart, I think, is that you want to invest in that and you are invested in that. So, what are mistakes people are making in the gym that you see a lot of that could actually be detrimental to the results that they seek?
So I have a little bit of a different mentality when it comes to like mistakes and what's right. I think that there is no right or wrong. There's only context and perspective. And one of the biggest perspective shifts that I had understanding training better was that like there is no right. Like when you walk into the gym and you're looking around, there is no right or wrong. There is no like they're making a mistake. Maybe they just really enjoy swinging the weight that way, and they don't care about the risk. They understand that they're gonna injure themselves at some point. Maybe that's just what they want to do. So just, I don't have a God complex when I walk in or when I'm on social media, like, hey, that's wrong. So you'll never see me make a post like with a big red X, like wrong, this is correct, or anything like that. I like to have a more nuanced discussion about things. And everybody's very individual in terms of what their intent is with an exercise, how an exercise can be better set up for them individually, what pain they may be having where they can't go into certain ranges, and who am I to like be like, hey, you're not getting full range of motions? Like maybe it hurts for them to go, you know. RTS is one of the big certifications that I have, resistance training specialist. Tom Purvis is the mastermind behind it, and he's taught a lot of the greats in the industry in terms of resistance training, like hypertrophy coach, like N1 education. I'm sure you've seen some of these channels. Um, but he like when you go into these courses, you'll ask certain questions and they almost make you feel stupid because it's like, why? Like there was a student in one of the classes and they were like, it hurts when I do this, and he's like, well, don't do that. And like everybody's just like, blown away by such a like, like simple answer. But a lot of these things where there's just so much nuance to every conversation when it comes to training. So but I would say like things that people could be doing better within the context of bodybuilding, to answer your question. Sorry, I keep going on these tangents, but
No, those tangents are good.
is like just overall training programming and volume allocation and waxing and waning that volume based on individual response is like something that I think should be better prioritized within an athlete's programming, because of how much it contributes to that total fatigue accumulation, especially within fat loss phases, especially in terms of mitigating negative impacts of contest preps long term, and then managing that to the best, and even like the success of like a peak, right? Managing training the fatigue going into a peak of a show. If you have a lot of, if somebody's doing cardio like the morning of a show and you're just adding to a bunch of inflammation, it could be detrimental to somebody. So all these things can be better managed, I think, a little bit better managed with a little bit more prioritization. And it takes a lot of effort for me to do a check and response. I'm reviewing people's training footage very in depth. I'm not just like, hey, fix this, or like move your hand here, like in a WhatsApp message. Like I'm genuinely like giving them very thorough explanations through these video reviews. So it takes a lot of effort, and sometimes coaches want to streamline things and not have that level of attention, and maybe their roster is very large and it's difficult for them to be able to do that, but I think that could probably be better executed within the realm of bodybuilding.
That's a really good perspective. I like how you said there's not necessarily a wrong. It's more so just the reasoning behind certain things or why things are being executed the way they are. And also managing for the response from the athlete to the programming you're providing them. It seems like me and you've already covered a lot of those overlooked components by bikini athletes in the sport and what can help them be successful. Are there other components you feel have been overlooked?
With bikini specifically, or just in general?
Yeah,
Bikini
bikini.
specifically. I think understanding the stress load on the female body specifically, and this could be a little bit controversial for people to hear too. I'm not quite sure why, but the female body is a little bit more, generally speaking, delicate than a male body. So the total stress load that you're placing on it, it's probable that you're going to have a higher level of negative feedback than a male body may have, for example, and a less resilience to that chronic stress over long periods of time. The female body does not like to be starved of food. It does not like to be starved of resources. It does not like to be under immense amount of physical stress over long periods of time. And there will be backlash to that. So I think one thing that bikini competitors can do better about is understanding that when they get into this sport on the front end so that they can have more realistic expectations in terms of outcomes, whether they be negative or positive.
Hmm. Yeah, I could see why someone would take offense to that if they don't understand where you're coming from with it. You're not saying women are delicate flowers who can't be pushed. You're saying like there's just more to manage when it comes to pushing them.
Yeah, the total stress load can have like heavier negative impacts on the female body than it can be a little bit. It doesn't like those things. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't like to be starved. It doesn't like to have a lot of physical load on it all the time over long periods of time. It just doesn't quite handle it all that well, generally speaking. I'm
Why
trying.
is that?
Um, oh man, we're just going to get even more controversial here. And I don't understand why it's controversial because it's really just biology, but uh,
Right.
trying to be relatively politically correct, I guess. Um, a lot of it's for childbearing purposes, and the ability to the body's signaling of an abundance of resources. So whether that be food, shelter, low stress levels where they're like relatively taken care of, and to be able to be in a position to have children and be able to provide for them. Because if your cup is empty, you're not able to feed yourself. You're not able to be in a position where you have relatively low stress or an abundance of resource. How are you going to be able to feed a child? So that's where we get these hormonal downregulations, whether it be sex hormones, thyroid, all these different things. It's all kind of as a result of that sort of systematic kind of um, intention that the female body has to bear children, if that makes sense.
It does. And I actually asked because I think more context can sometimes decriminalize, like give me some more context before people start making up their own story about you, because I think it's important that we recognize there is a purpose for our body biologically to procreate. Whether or not you choose to do that is not what we're discussing.
There we
It's
go.
yeah, I got
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's just that you're working with the individual and with what they have. And that goes back to your point about risk too, what you're willing to risk versus not. And I actually think it's a really cool thing that as female athletes, we get to push our body that way and we get to create a potentially higher or more resilient body. Because in my mind, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be like a super mom, like come on, bring it. But like you said, your body naturally is gonna want to be in that safe space for both you and the baby. And that's just you're working with that whether or not you're trying to conceive or not.
100%. So yeah, the female body, generally speaking, kind of gravitates towards that comfort and abundance of resource, and depriving it of that, you're going to get some negative impacts. And your body's basically like, hey, we're not in a position to be having children right now. And that's where you can see a lot of the thyroid downregulation too. It's that it's trying to lower its set point in terms of what it needs to have in abundance of resources. So like if your maintenance is 1,000 calories, for example, which is relatively low based on the individual, very low based on an individual, I would say. That's like lowering your set point in terms of your abundance would be 1,100 calories, 1,200 calories. And then you're back into a position of abundance, right? So that's what the body's doing is it's like trying to figure out where it needs to be in order to be able to, for you to be able to procreate, basically.
You know what? That actually takes me down a different path that I'm hoping to get your feedback on too. Um, And I love the coaches series this time around because I feel like I'm having more free conversations with coaches versus like, here's my set of questions. So I was thinking as you were saying that, like women put a lot of stress on themselves for how they look because of the expectations of the sport and of the industry. So they're not always happy to gain the body fat that maybe their body is better off having when they are trying to conceive, or even if they're not, just what the body's used to maybe going back to. How do you work with a client who is struggling with the fact of potentially gaining body fat in the restoration of their health, or reversing or improving for their next prep?
That can be very individual dependent in terms of what their responses are to that abundance of calories that we discussed. You know, some people will gain 40 pounds very quickly. Some people will eat whatever they want after a show for weeks and only gain 10 pounds. So there's a genetic component to that. There's um, how the prep was managed, how deep you had to go to get to where you wanted to be, all these different aspects of things. And I find a lot of the times, like even people that really come out of a prep like imbalanced and end up gaining a lot of weight. Um, just giving it time, because like a lot of competitors, if you like completely just blow your reverse side, there's no reason to cry over spilled milk. Like it happened. Okay. We're not going to sit here and wallow in self-pity. But what I tend to see happen, this is kind of anecdotal, but if you just like say that was your experience, you're done competing now. You're like, okay, the sport wasn't quite for me. There's other areas of my life I want to focus on. If you just give it some time, your body starts to like figure itself back out. And then you'll see that weight start to come off, even if they're not even on a diet or like hardly exercising anymore. Give it like a year or two, and their body's like, okay. And they're kind of like back into their equilibrium, because it's like, okay, there's like an abundance of mindset. You're not gonna or abundance of um resources. You're not gonna put us back into that state immediately after. So a lot of it's just time, like giving yourself time. And I use the term it's a marathon, not a sprint all the time. And it may be cliche, but it's like the most relevant thing I think to bodybuilding and these journeys in general is just being patient and understanding that things will play out if you approach them appropriately and try to like manage the extremes to the best of your ability and understand that you are pushing yourself to extremes.
And most athletes have a life outside of competing. So there's so many other things influencing that. And you kind of started answering this, but this is part of my hypothetical questions, which is if your client came to you and said that they rebounded after their show, but they are under the impression that they want to reverse it and get back to normal, what do you do?
A lot of it's first reframing their mindset in terms of like we can't go back into a diet. Like you're here now. This is where we're at, and this is what we need to do, because it's a hard position to be in, and a lot of athletes will get very frustrated about my kind of response to this is like I gained 40 pounds. What do I do? Can we go back into a diet? It's like, I'm sorry, we can't. We need to take some responsibility here. It happened. That's it. Your set point, your metabolic set point is very relatively low. Like, we gain 40 pounds and your maintenance is still at like 1,200 calories. Like, what do we do here? And it's like, we have to reframe that mindset of like, it's going to take time. We need to pull labs and see where we can be filling in gaps or potentially supplementing, supporting in areas hormonally, where we can, and just understanding that it's going to take time to get back to that equilibrium that you're seeking. And a lot of people just don't want to hear that, unfortunately. And but if they go off and they kind of just do their own thing for a few years, like it tends to just happen anyway. So, but if they want a more like expedited process and they want a more guided process and they want to compete again in the future, then working with a coach is probably going to be the best route.
Definitely. That is the hardest pill to swallow. Like, I think when someone hits that 40-pound mark or 30-pound mark or whatever it is, and it was achieved in a way that wasn't desirable or representative of them as an athlete, it's even harder to swallow that pill. And then when someone's telling you, like, yeah, it's a matter of time, I always like to remind competitors you're going to invest the time anyways if you truly love this. So whether it's 26 weeks of trying to get yourself back where you need to be healthy to prep, and then another 52 weeks of prep because you've got a lot of work to do and you need to take a better approach, like you're going to live this lifestyle anyways. It's just going to be maybe a magnified approach when you are actively competing. So I really like how you said the first thing is to reframe their mind to be okay with the time. Like there is no going back. You just got to sit in the shit and smell it so you don't want to do it again. And you just mend it and then you learn.
Absolutely. And I do prioritize like the functional health side of things a lot. And I've done a lot to educate myself in those realms as well. And I think that a lot of competitors in that position to seek out like that magic protocol or that magic, like it's my gut or it's this or it's that. And it could be, but putting yourself right back into a very strenuous protocol of like shoveling supplements down all day long and tracking all of that and like being super like fearful of certain food groups and all these different things are just going to continue to contribute to that chronic stress that you've been experiencing. So sometimes you just have to, like you said, sit in the shit and just, own that that's the position you're in and you need to be patient and trust the process that, your body will be able to find equilibrium again at some point.
Definitely. Yeah, having faith in that and knowing it's going to be okay. And I think similarly, athletes struggle even before a show. So let's talk about this hypothetical. Someone comes to you, they're your client, okay? They're 4 weeks out, but they keep saying that they don't feel ready. But you believe that your client is ready and gonna be ready. What is your response?
If I truly believe somebody's gonna be ready and we're good, it depends on how extensive their doubts are. Like if they're really, really, really struggling, I would perhaps hop on a call so they can hear the tone of my voice. We can discuss it a little bit more in depth and I can have more empathy and like all these different things. But if it's just kind of like, hey, I'm not really feeling ready, it's like giving some level of reassurance, but making sure that they're not like just seeking validation necessarily too. Like, where is that intent coming from? Can I give this person what they need to kind of fill that gap? I find that my athletes I don't really tend to run into that problem much. I feel like I'm pretty thorough with my communication. So I think sometimes that can be a communication gap with coaches and athletes where it's like, hey, let's keep going. And it's like, well, am I going to be ready? It's like, they'll get a full video response of me hearing the tone of my voice, like, oh my God, like this is epic. Like we're going into like, we're going to be starting the peaking process here in a couple weeks. Like they're going to be hearing that. And so they're already kind of reassured. So it could be a gap that's missing already in your coaching strategies. And if it's just the client, it's like no matter how much reassurance you give the client in terms of like their doubts, it's like, okay, like maybe we need to take some personal responsibility here and find a better frame of mind and some like, I don't know, are you just like taking in a bunch of negativity? Like what channels are you looking at in social media? And like, are you looking at other competitors that are doing the show? Like all these, like maybe it's an external thing that isn't just, some doubts that we can handle together.
Yeah, and like, um, are you going on Facebook and posting in a group to get feedback from people who aren't your coach, who have no idea what journey you've been on? And
That's a big one. That's
you
a
see
big,
that too.
yeah. Or like, or there's them accepting unsolicited advice from other people or coaches. And I mean, that's a huge red flag. If somebody's giving you unsolicited advice, I think that that's like one of the biggest red flags. If you go and ask like another coach, like, hey, what do you think? Like, that's kind of on you, and you're planting more seeds of doubt in your head and you're self-sabotaging to some extent at that point. And especially with like the Facebook groups or Reddit or whatever channel. I mean,
Edit.
yeah, let's stay away from that topic, but
Cesspool.
but yeah, so like wherever you're going and seeking out other validation elsewhere, in terms of where you're at progress wise, like you're already kind of shooting yourself in the foot because you chose to work with that coach, you trust them. And if there is a level like that high level of doubt, you should probably reassess. And I don't know, some people like are so doubtful that they have to drop a coach and hop to another coach 4 weeks out or whatever it may be, and that's an unfortunate circumstance. But I don't know if you're just a little bit doubtful, like talk with your coach about it, you know. And if you can manage getting through the rest of the prep, and it's like, hey, the communication just wasn't quite there, then maybe you need to go a different route, or maybe you need to self reflect. Like, was I looking at other competitors? Was I looking through these channels all the time, and did I have a negative mindset? Was I seeing everything as a negative? Not even just like bodybuilding channels, but what you're taking in general. Like, is the music you're listening to negative? Are you watching the news, like bad news all the time? Like, well, all these different things contributing to a negative mindset that are planting seeds of doubt in your head are all things that you could probably self reflect on.
So true. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. So let me ask you some rapid fire questions.
Oh boy.
Now, they're never rapid fire. I always say that, and the coaches are like, so let me really quickly just explain this, which I appreciate and I value. So I'll ask you rapid fire, but then we can like revisit some with the nuance. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So do you believe in the use of waist trainers?
It depends on the context. I can see that do you mind if I go nuance right now?
Go ahead, go for it.
Okay. Okay. I think that there's validity to it, not how people necessarily think. I don't think that it physiologically shrinks your waist, but what it can do is help train you to keep an isometric contraction in the midsection. So, like, if you're at work and you're wearing a waist trainer and it's like really tight, like you're kind of forced to hold that in. So you're training yourself and like creating the habit of keeping your stomach tight, like when you're walking around. So that's going to help if you're like walking on the stage. So I actually have been a proponent of waist trainers, and like it's another one of those conversations where people are like it's either this or it's that. I'm like, there's gray area here. Let's like have a nuanced conversation. So it's not gonna like unless you're wearing like a really really aggressive like corset that's like crunching your, I don't know, doing whatever. It's not going to shrink your waist in that sense, but it could help you keep your waist held tighter when you're walking around, and that could help um, with endurance in terms of posing on stage as well.
I feel like, yeah, the endurance on stage. Because if you're, it's like if you only practice posing for like just your routine and you don't consider all the time you're going to stand on the side or you're going to be compared, that's
Yep.
generally when the judges start to see like, oh, you're losing core control. So I'm glad that you brought that point up too.
Do that belly breathing. It also can help train you to like breathe through your chest a little bit more and less through the belly. So I can find it can be helpful, but it's definitely not one of those things where it's like, should I be wearing a waist trainer? It's like let's not be too concerned about that. Like let's focus on the other low hanging fruit.
Okay, so do you think it's better to do a structured meal plan or if it fits your macros?
Another gray area. So it depends on the athlete. I think within a contest prep, when we're getting if you really want to peak at the highest level and you want things to be as dialed in as possible, and you're looking for that extra couple percent, I pretty much require that my athletes are on a very select meal plan in terms of food selection, and you kind of have to go through the reason that we do that through the prep too is to set us up for that, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Just so that we have more predictability within the programming. Because if you just toss in some random fruit and all of a sudden you have an allergic reaction, or your gut just doesn't agree with it, or whatever it may be, or we just know that these certain foods digest well and we're heading into this peak, we know exactly how you're going to respond to it. Just creates a level of predictability. It's not about whether or not you can elicit the same amount of response body composition wise in terms of fat loss or anything. That's not necessarily the purpose behind it. In the off season, I'm much more lenient. My programs are on a spreadsheet, and you get the full macro breakdown of every food selection, every amount, even down to like electrolytes, potassium, sodium within the food. So like it's all broken down there, and I'm very lenient in the off season in terms of I allow for free meals, free days, or if you want to go rogue and completely just track your macros based off the macro totals that are on your program, I'm cool with that in the off season. Just be conscious of like food selections and what may be affecting your digestion negatively. I try to communicate those things, so it's like I think it's best as a coach to be flexible in that regard too, where we can do both. We don't have to just be one or the other. And then I also have on my spreadsheets like a food swap tab where they can swap out foods pretty freely and have like 1-to-1 ratios where it's like, oh, I'm really sick of this food. Let me swap this out. And that makes things easier for a client and helps with like um, just being able to sustain diets for long periods of time and prevent burnout. So I think it's like a balance of how can we get this extremely detailed and like be very predictable within a contest prep, but also like how do we create sustainability long term and aren't rigid in areas that don't need to be rigid, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And I like how you broke down that nuance too, because even if you follow macros, you generally get into a groove with what you're eating. And
Yeah,
then hopefully that's what you stick to before your show.
hopefully, but the more things that we can like, more things that a coach has control over during a peak, like it there may be a better outcome, the higher probability of a better outcome. I think there is. So that's just my personal take on it.
Okay, so do you believe in fasted cardio?
Um, if with the use of PEDs, yes. Um, and the reason for that is fatty acid mobilization when you're using growth hormone. Yohimbine can contribute to that as well. But outside of that, no.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that with yohimbine, like really fasted cardio won't elicit any greater fat loss effect unless you're taking caffeine and yohimbine and you're genuinely fasted, not like you ate 4 hours and got 3 hours of sleep, you know?
Yeah, so if you're on performance enhancing drugs or supplements that help elicit fatty acid mobilization, then fasted cardio can be beneficial in that regard. Um, so yeah, but
Cool.
outside of that, it's all energy balance.
Okay. And then are you a fan of water cutting?
You mean cutting water or manipulating like fluids and sodium peak week?
I'm specifically referring to cutting water, but I would love to hear your take on the manipulation side of things from that.
I do manipulate sodium and fluids. I've gotten a lot better at that this past year. I think that it's not something that you need to be doing if you aren't extremely detailed in terms of feedback as a coach or being extremely calculated in how you're doing it and responses to each individual meal or the like what the individual response like meal to meal during a peaking process. Like you really have to be dialed in with that in order to execute that at a high level. If you just like, oh, we cut this much water, that's just what I do as a coach, absolutely not. And I've had success in the past by just riding water where it's at all the way through a show. I've had success, um, you know, doing approaching things differently, but with especially outside of bikini. I know this is like more of a bikini podcast, but to get somebody really, really, really dry and like gnarly looking, like you kind of have to manipulate those things a little bit.
I'm glad that you said that actually, because I always find that fascinating consideration for other divisions and their approach. And that also exemplifies the importance of not listening to bro chat podcasts and then thinking you should be drying out like that as a bikini competitor.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very individual based on the athlete and where they're at body composition wise too. Like, so it's really dependent on the context and the athlete. And if you want, if some, because bikini athletes can vary a lot, like genetically, in terms of like some of them have naturally a little bit harder of a look, and some of them have maybe a little bit softer of a look, no matter where they're at body composition wise. And so sometimes that can come into play in terms of bringing out a little bit harder of a look. And with bikini, it's all about finding that middle line in terms of conditioning. So I definitely think that it's a tool that people shouldn't necessarily like toss out the window, but it's also depending on the person, not necessary.
You're saying like be strategic with it. Don't just like say, hey, yeah, take out a gallon of water when you haven't even considered as a coach what that could do to your athlete.
100%. There should be a lot when it comes to manipulating electrolytes and fluid. There should be a lot of methodology behind it.
So, steady state cardio or high intensity interval training for fat loss, specifically for those who are trying to maintain size in their glutes.
Um, so maintaining size in your glutes, I honestly don't think that like your approach to cardio is going to contribute to you being able to retain tissue as much as you may think. A lot of that's just going to be you being in a deficit and your total stress load as well as like your training strategies. I think that cardio is going to have a lot less of an impact on that than you may think. And then in terms of fat loss, I like to go by calories burned. So I like to leave some autonomy there in terms of what kind of cardio you want to be doing. If you want to be doing high intensity interval training or you want to be doing steady state, it's kind of up to you. At the end of the day, the amount of calories burned is what's going to matter there. With hit training, it's more of an acute stress, and with steady state, it's a little bit more of a like a extended stress on the body. So I think that that kind of balances itself out, if that makes sense. So I don't really have a preference with athletes. I go by calories burned with, and I
How
think
do
that
you
that.
account?
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. You're good. You're good.
How do you account for calories burn?
So typically like settings on a cardio machine, I'll have them input that and take off their wearable device typically. So it's not tracking their steps too. I'm big on tracking steps too. So that's something that I manipulate through a contest prep. But usually like the settings give us a good general idea. and it's usually pretty consistent. I mean, otherwise you're doing what, like somebody's gonna be like, do 40 minutes at level blank on a stairmaster, right? It's like, I think that that's less individualized than somebody climbing onto a machine and being like, here's my age, here's my weight, and then calculating it out where it's like, okay, this is how many calories you burn. I think that that might be a little bit more accurate than just like, hey, go hop on a stairmaster for an hour. So that's how I approach it. Um, and like I said, I have them remove their wearable device so that we're not tracking steps and we don't end up with like 30,000 steps at the end of the day. So
That's super interesting, actually, because I know some coaches will just have their clients track steps. They won't even give them a cardio. They're just like, okay, track steps, and then we're going to just shoot for this. And then some who will say, leave your wearable device on while doing cardio, let that attribute or contribute to your step count. So, what is your reasoning for the approach you take?
I like to keep them separate. And it's just a little bit harder to like calculate as a coach if you're like blending them together. So I think that it just makes sense to me where it's like this is something where it's like not like these differences aren't going to be detrimental to the outcome or like be like that significant in terms of your results, but it's just kind of like how a coach goes about like organizing their programming for their own, like just how I perceive it when I'm looking at check-in and viewing activity on an athlete's program. So um, I think that that's more like my preference in terms of how I like to track things. I just think it makes sense to separate them. And if I want to increase steps, I'm going to do that. If I want to increase calories burned during their cardio sessions, I'm going to do that. But if I increase cardio, then I have to account that that's going to be contributing to more steps in their totals. And it's like, I don't know, that just seems a little bit jumbled to me.
That makes sense. It's kind of like the step tracking is outside of the movement that you're putting into their programming. It's like, how sedentary are you outside of our normal? And that also helps you then determine, like, I imagine you said earlier, fatigue is important to you as a coach. And like, I know as an athlete, sometimes you start getting to that phase where you're like, I'm not even getting up the couch. I'm not getting up off the couch to go get another thing from, like, I don't care if my phone's over there. I'm staying. Like, but if I was energetic in the beginning of my prep, that might look very different. I might be willing to go for that extra walk or do that extra movement. So I can see how for you as a coach, that would help you categorize their changes in maybe effort too.
That's why tracking calories with cardio is a little bit better, in my opinion, as well. Is that like it's hard to regulate intensity with cardio. So maybe they're like thinking they're doing steady state, but they're really just going for a walk on the treadmill, and like we're not getting the response that I want in terms of fat loss. And it's like then I have to figure out like what's your intensity look like on cardio? How are we going to keep it consistent? What if you want to use other cardio equipment? What if you go to a different gym and they don't have that specific piece? What if the level on a stairmaster at one place is like way faster than it is on at another place? Because you'll hop on a stairmaster, it's like level 5 is like it's like kind of like this at one place, and then you're like doing this at another place, you know. So I think that inputting the your information into a piece of equipment and that helping you regulate like how much intensity you need to have within that cardio. Because if you're fatigued and you're like not wanting to get off the couch, like you said, like, and you're going and hopping on a stairmaster for an hour when really you don't need to be on there for that long. Like you're just doing that to yourself because you're not, the intensity isn't quite there, or I don't know. I find that it works better this way and it allows for some autonomy. It's very similar to like flexible dining to some extent, but with cardio almost.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I appreciate your perspective on that. And it's another approach that I actually don't think has been mentioned. Actually, yeah, one coach did mention it in a previous coaching series, but I think that it's a different way of looking at the variables that you're tracking. And it's giving an opportunity where it's leaving less room for question in the athlete's mind. And I imagine, and maybe I'm like projecting, but like I imagine there's some athletes who aren't ready for that level of tracking.
Yeah, so I try to be very thorough with instruction and helping them understand. And I'm always like, always open to questions. Like I sometimes people are like, hey coach, sorry to bother you. I'm like, dude, it's all good. Like, you know, please like bother me with questions. I would rather you have clarity and be executing at a high level than us not knowing what we're doing and just guessing. And then we find out when we're 1 week out that you've been doing something a certain way. And I'm just like, what the hell is that? You know? So but yeah, so I'm always open to like answering questions. I think that that's important, and making sure that you're very thorough with instructions, and that's something that develops over time as a coach. Is like you learn like what needs to be added to the instructions that you give an athlete, and what needs to be taken away. What is like fluff that is just too much information where they're just like, I'm not even going to read this, right? So when they sign up with me, they receive a handbook where it's pretty much like base level kind of guidelines. And then there's some on the spreadsheet as well, like additional instructions in terms of more nuances. So it's kind of broken down. And then when I send them their program, they're getting that Loom video where I'm breaking it down even more. They're hearing the tone of my voice. I can thoroughly explain things, and then also reiterating like, hey, please make sure you review this information and let me know if you have any questions and that kind of stuff. So a lot of it's just like setting expectations and being thorough with instructions and having an open line of communication.
Yeah, that makes so much sense and so important. I've learned that over the years too, like running an online business. You start with something very basic, and then every question you get becomes an outline for your next system, really.
Yeah, and you're constantly upgrading and like refining those systems, and that's just part of being a business owner.
Definitely. So, is there anything I didn't ask you that you think I should have?
I think we covered a lot of very great topics, and hopefully, this can be very, very insightful to a lot of competitors. And like, I am very big on like, I would much rather shift paradigms and like help somebody shift their perspective towards the entirety of something rather than give them like specifics. So if I think that we definitely accomplished that with the topics that we discussed.
I'm glad you feel that way. I think so too. I think it was very much like, let's exist in the gray area and get comfortable there, even though it's not normal to do so.
100%. And like black and white is comfortable for people. It's what they're familiar with. It's like very easy to just be like this. Having a nuanced conversation is challenging, and not everybody's equipped to have that. But if they can take a couple little golden nuggets that help to shift perspectives on things, where they view things a little bit differently, or may see things in a more positive light rather than a negative, then we're doing good in the world.
That's right. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Can you share with everybody how they can work with you, learn about you, follow your journey as well?
Yes, you can follow me personally on Instagram at Sean Irwin, SeanIrwin, like the crocodile hunter underscore. And then at Saga Coaching, that's SAGA. And sagacoaching.com, you can input an application. I have application links in my bios everywhere. It's pretty easy to reach us. So shoot us a DM, anything. We're happy to chat it up. So
Awesome. Okay, well, that'll always be in the show notes page, you guys. That's on celestial.fit/podcast. So if you're listening right away, it'll be at the top of the page. If you're listening in the future, scroll down to the category section. Sean will have his own section, and he will also be in the Coach Week or whatever I end up calling this version of the series. So you'll find it there, not just the links, but also a breakdown of the episodes. So you can go back and listen to some of your favorite parts as well. It means so much when you share your takeaways and what you learn. I mean, obviously, me and Sean were talking about how much we're committed to the impact and the positive impact. So let us know what you learn. Let us know that you listen and that you appreciate it, or follow up with questions for us. That always is so awesome. So thank you guys for listening. And Sean, thanks for coming on.
thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Me too. You are welcome.